It's time to review another Star Wars game. Unfortunately, this one features the soundtrack work of John Williams, and so I can't use it without YouTube complaining. Good, my young apprentice. Let the hate flow through you. Well, no, because firstly I can just use the Dark Forces soundtrack by Clint Bajakian, and secondly, because you're not a Sith Lord, you're just me with a towel on my head. Give in to your hate. No, seriously, I'll turn on the light. Look. Unlimited power. Ow. Oh. Get off my lawn. Before talking about Star Wars, Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2, Manchester United 0, I'm going to briefly chat about the original Dark Forces. Dark Forces was reportedly an official response to a pile of fans creating custom Star Wars Doom mods. It introduces us to former Imperial officer turned mercenary for hire and professional badass Kyle Katarn. When missions for the rebels are deemed too dangerous for operatives, he gets sent in to single-handedly wreck the place by being a one-man killing machine. It's a good game, but time hasn't been kind to it. The excellent level design and innovations like swimming and jumping are points in its favour, and the fact that they wrote an entirely new engine from scratch for it instead of just licensing Dooms was most impressive. Unfortunately, because the source code to the Jedi engine was never released, the game didn't receive the loving community enhancement that other titles on the Doom and Build engines did. The closest we got was the unfinished Dark XL, which is mostly playable but missing key features. An Obsidian developer by the name of Jason Lewis was recreating the first level of the game in more modern tech. But whether he'll do the full title is unknown, and the last update was months ago, so don't hold your breath. Unless you're capable of holding it until November 1st, the slated release date for the Force engine, a modern Jedi replacement reverse engineered for Dark Forces and Outlaws. If that turns out to be good, you can expect a review of the first game soon after. It's the same developer as Dark XL, so here's hoping they finish strong. Why the preamble? Because aside from being the predecessor to the focus of today's review, Dark Forces sold over 1 million copies, and was well on the way to doing so when LucasArts decided that maybe a sequel would be a good idea. Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, hereafter known as Jedi Knight, has the same protagonist as the original, and this time it's personal. Well, it was before, as he knew that the Imperials killed his father, but this time, thanks to a droid in the opening cutscene, he knows who killed his father. A dark Jedi by the name of Jarek. Obi-Wan never told him what happened to his father. The MacGuffin that our antagonist is after is the fabled Valley of the Jedi, which would give him enough power to cause supernovas according to the dead Jedi who clearly loves his hyperbole. It's up to us to single-handedly tear through any opposition in order to prevent this. Well, not quite. Jan Ors makes a return from the first game in the Moldy Crow to aid us, but between those brief appearances to transport us places like a glorified Uber driver begrudgingly taking a violent drunk home, it's all up to Katarn. Bookending these levels is the full motion video you're being graced with now, and all of these scenes are very cheesy in a fun way. The Jedi Knight Wikipedia entry proudly states that this is the first official lightsaber footage filmed since Return of the Jedi in 1983. Neat! I don't think the acting and direction quite lives up to it, landing somewhere between good fan film and explicit parody. This was commonplace in gaming at the time, as evidenced by the cutscenes of games like Command & Conquer. What it does have is buckets of charm, and a more coherent plot than the latest movies. The team continued their development on the Jedi engine and embraced the dark side, upgrading it to Sith, a fully 3D enhancement that boasted hardware acceleration, widescreen support, and sound that was also 3D. When it arrived in late 1997, it was a technical marvel, as its chief competitor Quake had supported 3D acceleration less than a year, and not out of the box upon initial release like this did. To further highlight how big a deal this was, it happened around the time many other commercial shooters were still using the sprite-heavy Doom and build engines, from 93 and 95 respectively. First-person shooters were still called Doom clones, and the Gold Source and Unreal engines had yet to appear on the market. There are 3 ways to play Jedi Knight these days, with the default software rendering that makes it look even older than it is, with hardware acceleration courtesy of either the excellent DG Voodoo or some DLL meddling, or by installing General Tantor's compilation of community enhancements called Jedi Knight Remastered, which includes a version of the Jedi Knight graphics mod. I'm going with the latter, enforcing 30 frames a second, because while the game can run at a bizarre 47 frames, the camera only updates at 30, and unless you have a monitor with an adaptive refresh rate, it's going to stutter and not feel right. I've also removed the upscaled textures, because the injection model used by the mod causes stutter on my machine as it tries to load everything in real time. The engine was on the bleeding edge, and that makes stability an issue when you stuff it like a sausage casing with alterations and pray for everything to work. I'd personally advise not using any graphics mods, because frame drops will still happen even on the most lightly modded versions. After an opening cinematic featuring the beheading of our hyperbolic supernova's friend by the scenery-chewing Jarek, you're asked to create a player and select a difficulty level, so multiple users can play the game on a single machine, after which you're placed into a strange menu which features a fantastic setup program to tweak all kinds of details. This level of in-game customization would become standard in years to come, but seeing it all the way back in 1997 was crazy. You'll definitely need to use it in order to get more modernized key bindings and mouse sensitivity, including the ability to toggle auto-aiming off and crosshairs on. I'd also recommend disabling the DPI scaling if you're using Windows. Advanced options can be accessed by adding a parameter to the main executable, but that's largely superfluous. After sorting the controls and starting a new game, you become Kyle Katarn, our aforementioned angry bounty hunter high in the sprawling urban cityscape that is the moon of Nar Shaddaa. Your first job is to step past a dead body sprawled over your table like an oversized napkin and hunt down a droid, cutting through almost everything in your path. I say almost everything because NPCs exist. Much like Strife before it, Jedi Knight features some light role-playing elements, and non-hostile characters populate the world. You're free to kill everything that moves, but there are long-term consequences for doing so, and while these people have little to say, it still adds a degree of immersion that most shooters lacked at the time. And there are droids! The first big difference, that is after encountering an NPC and an enemy Gran actually running from you, is the verticality. Jedi Knight was the first game to my knowledge that truly provoked such a sense of depth with its levels, featuring vast chasms and vertigo-inducing crossings that were instant death for you and your enemies should you happen to slip. I'll never forget encountering those first environmental puzzles and tiptoeing out into the void, an experience unlike any other at the time. Your HUD gives you the usual readout of ammo and health, which is separated into shield points and hit points. The shield can be used to absorb blaster energy, but is useless against melee attacks, so the goal in the early game is to make sure nobody gets up close to you. Which is easier said than done because lots of these baddies want to live in your pocket. Shield and ammo pickups are all over the place, but health is much scarcer to come by, and you'll also want to use the Bacta tank item in order to improve your chances. That's right, this shooter has a rudimentary inventory system, accessed using the square parentheses to cycle through it, followed by enter to use the item. After a few shots with the Briar pistol, you pick up a Stormtrooper rifle, which is faster but less accurate. You can try to run around punching everything to death too, but I wouldn't recommend it. Thermal detonators are grenades that can blow up in your face too. The crossbow is more accurate and can fire a spread of bolts when charged. The repeater rifle is fast but weak and useless against larger targets. The real detonator is a rocket launcher. Sequence charges are mines, and the concussion rifle fires air that damages and throws enemies about the place. Absolutely none of this matters because by level 4, you have a lightsaber! The main selling point of the game, and one emblazoned upon the box art. You get a lightsaber! You can swing your lightsaber about in a first-person shooter like all your childhood fantasies and decimate enemies while listening to John Williams. Just like in the movies. Sure, this is more commonplace now, but back then there weren't hundreds of Star Wars games. And the only first-person shooter was its predecessor, and that didn't have any Jedi stuff. Speaking of Jedi stuff, let's talk Force powers. These are split into 3 groups. Central or neutral powers that anyone can use, light side powers, and the dark side. Jump allows you to jump high in the air like Sonic. Speed hurdles you along at breakneck rates like Sonic. Sight illuminates the area and reveals secrets and even NPCs with the map overlay, like Sonic. No, wait. Pull brings items to you including enemy guns. Healing heals you. I know, I was shocked too. Persuasion pacifies hostile targets. Blinding confuses foes for a time. Absorb converts force damage into force energy. Protection creates a shield that prevents damage, but only if you have no dark or central powers. Take it away, James in a towel. Grip is force choke. It crushes the life out of people. Lightning electrocutes them like in the movies. Destruction casts a ball of death, and deadly sight is also exclusive, hurting anyone you look at. You can literally kill with a glance. So it had physics puzzles and powers, voiced NPCs, huge levels, a fully realised story, and the worlds to tell it in, while taking advantage of a hardware acceleration of the late 90s. Remind you of anything? Despite obvious comparisons and the fact that it came out a full year before Half-Life, it's important to remember that Jedi Knight does feature hallmarks of the shooters it succeeded. Labyrinthine and maze-like maps come as standard, and there's collectible keycards and coloured item hunts, mindless enemy AI, levels that jump wildly from place to place instead of being contiguous, secret locations featuring pickups, and a gliding, fast-paced movement on ice with odd momentum mechanics, and glorious weapon bobbing. You'll also want to save a lot because there's no autosave, and every encounter is unpredictable. Just don't save a split second before you die or this will happen. This is proudly old school in its difficulty level, and it's implied in the cutscenes after the first 2 missions when your character is carted off to a medical frigate in bad shape. The bandages imply hurt, which is unrealistic really, as Kyle Katarn doesn't get hurt, he only gets angrier. For beginners, Nar Shaddaa is no picnic, and spans the opening 2 levels as you work your way steadily through the grimy industrial city, fighting off bounty hunters with your name at the top of their list. Whether it's the thuggish Gran with their fists, detonators and rifles, the pistol-wielding Rhodians with excellent aim, or the pig-like and ponderous Gamorreans that strike at you with halberds, you'll definitely want to shoot first. You return to your family home to find it swarming with Grave Tusken, who love a good crossbow session and will resort to rifles if they can't find one. After hunting through the maze that is your house layout and going for a little swim, you encounter some winged wildlife. Shoot them down and get to your father's workshop, because lightsaber! Before long, you'll start to encounter a certain type of droid, and you know exactly who they're foreshadowing. It's to Jedi Knight's credit that you're hours into the single-player campaign before finally blasting a stormtrooper. But after that, the difficulty just keeps ramping up as the Empire has much greater resources than your previous foes. ATST! ATST! Soon you'll need to start using those force powers you've been acquiring to navigate the levels. And like every great game, they're introduced in a fair and sensible way so you're not overwhelmed. The game will then really start to play to Kyle's strengths, killing lots of Imperials, but not before being interrupted. In addition to the 18 different types of opposition you'll encounter, Katarn will also face off against no less than 7 unique Dark Jedi, in fights to the death on specialised dueling maps. Just in case you didn't think the game was hard enough already. Though the appearance of lightsaber combat shouldn't be that surprising because of the box art, remember? What about pistols at dawn instead of this energy sword nonsense, old fellow? Capital idea! Whether you choose to take it cautiously and strike at close range, or run around like a headless chicken in a bloodthirsty rage, you gain a real appreciation for just what a driven and lethal individual Kyle Katarn is. He tears through his environments with a vengeance, the sheer variety of which are a big part of what makes Jedi Knight so memorable. In 2020, Jedi Knight is just like the Millennium Falcon. It might look like a piece of junk, but she's got it where it counts, kid. So long as you're willing to make a lot of special modifications yourself, this bucket of bolts puts the slick modern shooters with Star Wars skins to shame. You're probably thinking this is the Katarn household. Not anymore, and as you bound over the grass in my direction, I'll have to demand that you get off my lawn! Yes, again.